Good evening. David Willits here, Chair of the Foundation for Science and Technology. I'll just pause briefly while our participants all join us. I can see the numbers shooting up. Good. Fantastic. Well, welcome to this Foundation for Science and Technology event. Tonight's seminar is on nuclear cogeneration and net zero, which I think is a fascinating subject that's now moving rapidly up the policy agenda, ensuring that the heat from nuclear power stations, which for the absolute purists is one of the objections to nuclear power, can actually use to address some of the other challenges in decarbonizing energy demands. And it's going to be fascinating hearing from our experts how it can be used for domestic and industrial heating and perhaps even the green production of hydrogen. So we've got some very interesting questions in the background. How can we best use nuclear alongside renewables? How can this help drive our move to net zero? We're going to hear from three very distinguished panelists, and then we will move to Q&A. We'll hear first from Professor Robin Grimes of Imperial College, but who has also been Chief Scientific Advisor to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and also in April 2017 became Chief Science Advisor Nuclear to the Ministry of Defence. Then we'll hear from Jo Nettleton of the Environment Agency, and then thirdly from Duncan Hawthorne, CEO of Horizon Nuclear Power, charged with steering the creation of new nuclear power facilities. We'll then get to Q&A, and do use the Q&A function. Here's the guides about how to do it. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. Please use Q&A, not chat. The advantage of Q&A is everyone else can see the questions you're putting in and of course can upvote them, which helps me as chair identify the questions that are striking the chord. It's not quite fully democratic, but close to it. If it's heavily upvoted, the question is very likely to be asked. And we also do tweet on our event using the hashtag at FST Cogeneration. So without any more ado, I'm delighted that our first speaker is Professor Robin Grimes of Imperial, Foreign Office and the MOD, who recently led the Royal Society policy briefing, Nuclear Cogeneration, Civil Nuclear in a Low Carbon Future. Robin, thank you very much for sparing the time to join us. Over to you.
David, thank you very much indeed. I'm now going to try to share my screen and get some slides going. So let's see how this works. So here we go. Can everybody see those slides now?
Yeah, we can see them.
Yes, you might want to go to full screen.
Here we go then.
In my experience, the more senior and distinguished the scientists, the harder they find it to do things like this.
It's absolutely right. I mean, I used to write code and do all that kind of stuff, and I'm totally de-skilled. It's terrible. You're absolutely right. Well, hopefully not de-skilled in this area, or at least not too much anyway. So yes, David, you're quite right. This is the Royal Society policy briefing that has led us to a number of these sorts of conclusions, but also in parallel to the way that actually a lot of people are thinking about the future of nuclear energy. So I would suggest that people might be interested to read this briefing afterwards. So that's the HTTPS logo, and I hope you've all written that down by now. So what's led us to these sorts of conclusions on nuclear cogeneration? Well, we're looking forward, and the first thing to think about is the colossal amount of electricity that we're going to need if we're going to meet our 2050 targets. On the left side here, this donut is showing the sort of circumstances of energy consumption in the UK at the moment. And actually, electricity is not the largest part of it. Heating is considerably bigger, and transport only a little behind that. If we're truly going to decarbonize, we've got to work out not only how to produce low carbon electricity, but also change perhaps some of those into electricity, but also to decarbonize them directly. Now, at the moment, it is very clear, I think, to everyone that we're heading towards a grid that's dominated by renewables. However, the circumstances at the moment, and here's a graph that I picked, this was on the 4th of November, and this shows for wind, which is the green bar, nuclear, which is the brown, and then gas, which is blue, and then there's a plethora of other things. Over a 24-hour period, the fluctuations, not only in the total amount of electricity, and remember, electricity is only the small part at the moment, so this is going to get bigger, but also the way that gas here was able to make up for the intermittency in demand and the intermittency in what we were being delivered, in this case, mostly by wind. So nuclear has to deal with that intermittency problem, and that's going to grow. At the moment, the sort of gigawatt supply of nuclear that we've had for over 60 years, providing low carbon electricity, is based around base load. So that brown bar there doesn't change very much over this 24-hour period. And indeed it doesn't for weeks, months on end. It stays relatively constant, which is why we call it these base load capacity. Many of those reactors are going to come offline that we have at the moment. They've done a great job for a long time, but they're coming to the end of their design lifetimes. So they're going to be replaced with some more base load constant supply, but that doesn't deal with the intermittency issue. So how do we do that? How does nuclear play a part in this sort of landscape? Now, first of all, let's remember that in the sort of nuclear that we're used to, much of the energy that's generated is lost as waste heat after the turbines have gone round. So we can use some of that waste heat to do some useful things. It can do district heating, but it can also support the development of hydrogen via electrolysis, because you get more efficient electrolysis if you've got a hotter material, water, that you're electrolyzing. But current generation nuclear is not really designed to utilize that waste heat. We could use existing, but it's kind of inefficient and expensive. So we're really looking towards new types of reactors, both small modular reactors and also advanced modular reactors. And those can be and are being designed with cogeneration in mind. But it's not all about the waste heat. Actually, what we want to do is use the heat from the reactors directly. And the reason we want to do that is that this waste heat, which is on this part of the graph here, is lowish temperatures. The SMRs that we're thinking about, which are based on light water reactors, are this intermediate temperatures. But actually, it's the high temperatures that we might be able to deliver from advanced modular reactors that are going to allow us to do the interesting chemistry up at this end at much higher temperatures. So what does the picture look like? You have electricity generated by your reactors when you need electricity. That might be, for example, when the renewables, the wind isn't blowing or it's not particularly sunny, but they produce other products that we need when there is plenty of electricity developed by renewables. So in this way, not only do they deal with the intermittency issue, but by dealing with it in this way, they develop products which are difficult to decarbonize in other sorts of ways. And these would include things like ammonia, synthetic fuels, as well as direct hydrogen for a hydrogen-based activities, part of the hydrogen economy. Now, I've mentioned already this issue of small modular reactors and advanced modular reactors. Let me tell you a little bit more about those. So small modular reactors are based around existing light water reactor, probably pressurized water reactor types of technologies. It's the sort of thing that we're used to. It's the sort of thing that we're building at Hinkley. It's the sort of thing that probably will be built at Sizewell. Now, the output temperature of those can do some interesting things, but not the sort of interesting things that advanced modular reactors will be able to do, if in particular that we following UK understanding of graphite, a high temperature, graphite moderated and helium cooled type of design. Then we have 800 degrees at our disposal to do that interesting chemistry. And I think with the SMRs, there is an opportunity here for the UK through the Rolls-Royce PWR design. So where is all this coming from? Well, at the moment, there is the gigawatt build that we're engaged in, and those are presently being built by EDF. The fuel comes from Areva. There isn't a manufacturing capacity to produce the pressure vessels, and honestly, there isn't in the UK or in Europe. Really, that's Japan and Korea. The majority of the components for the reactor come from the French supply chain. But in the UK, we are doing much of the civil engineering. And the civil engineering course for nuclear plant is complicated. Following to SMRs, which are more optimized to follow demand structures, we could use UK supply chain for the fuel via Springfields. We have the opportunity to use UK supply chain, Sheffield Forge Masters, for many of the heavy components. The majority of components could then come through, for example, through Rolls-Royce supply chain. And of course, we can build on the civil engineering from the gigawatts for the new SMRs. That allows us to develop a UK nuclear manufacturing supply chain. And that's that manufacturing supply chain that I'm focusing on here, because we can then build on that with respect to advanced modular reactor designs to give us that high temperature heat. So it was nice to see a roadmap. So this is the kind of roadmap that we could develop if we wish to, with the gigawatt baseload production here, with the SMRs managing some of that intermittency and some cogeneration, following on to the AMRs with those high temperature, and that high temperature use creates a demand for high temperature output, the sort of high temperatures that are also provided by fusion. So in many ways, the AMR also allows us to get ready for fusion. So I'm going to stop there, and these are the sort of key points that I think I've made for you, and I'm sure the slides will be available afterwards to have a look at. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Robin. Very interesting indeed, and a really important link made there to the hot topic in government of policy on SMRs and going beyond that. So very relevant to today's debates. Thank you so much. We're now going to hear from Dr. Jo Nettleton. She works at the Environment Agency, which she joined in 2015. She is an expert in radiation and nuclear, and she's now Deputy Director and Head of Radioactive Substances and Installations Regulation at the Environment Agency. Jo, thank you very much for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you. Could I have my first slide, please? Gavin? Can I just check, are people struggling with my slides?
I think we're just, Jo, I think we're just,
Yeah,
here
okay.
we are, here we are, there we are.
Okay, good evening, everybody. This is going to be a whistle-stop tour through Cogeneration's contribution to sustainable energy production through the Environment Agency lens. Next slide, please. For those of you who are not familiar with the Environment Agency, we work across England to create a better place for people and wildlife, and our role is to protect people and the environment. We've recently published a strategy to 2025, which has 3 overarching goals: to become a nation resilient to climate change, climate is changing, to have healthy air, land and water, and to achieve green growth and a sustainable future. Next slide, please. Our Environment Agency remit is massive, actually. There are around 9,000–10,000 of us working across a number of areas, including flood risk management, looking after water resources, and regulating a whole range of sectors and industries, including radioactive substances and the nuclear industry. Next slide, please. So for the nuclear industry and radioactive substances as a whole, we regulate radioactive waste and emissions to air, land and water. For the nuclear industry, that's where our regulation stops. We regulate across the full piece of nuclear, MOD, civil energy production and legacy and waste. We also regulate non-nuclear uses of radioactive substances, again, across the full range of industries, medical applications, industrial applications, naturally occurring radioactive material. And here, as well as waste and emissions, we also regulate keeping and use of radioactive sources and security of high activity sources. Next slide, please. This slide really just summarises everything that Robin has just said. Why is cogeneration important? Because most nuclear plants don't recover waste heat, and that's a whole body. About 70% of the energy produced is going to waste at the moment. If we can capture that and use it through heating or direct use, then that's a massive contribution to sustainable energy production. That's not possible for existing nuclear plants. It is possible for new nuclear plants, both large scale. For example, there are some considerations about domestic community heating around Sizewell C as that's developed. But today, particularly, as Robin excellently described, all sorts of opportunities around the smaller reactors, whether that's the lower temperature, small modular reactors using existing technology, which have the potential for domestic heating, or those higher temperature advanced nuclear technology, advanced modular reactors, which can be used to heat industrial processes, including hydrogen production. And of course, because the reactors are smaller, clues in the name, they can be located much closer to communities or industrial sites, or safety and environmental protections being in place. And as Robin said, that offers flexibility over and above baseload electricity production. Next slide, please. Challenging times. Climate is changing, the temperature is getting hotter. We are going to be subject to more extreme weather events, but as well as the challenge, there is an awful lot of opportunity ahead. The world's woken up to the challenge finally, in large part. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, for example, are really important in terms of directing where we want to focus as a world. And the UK government is playing its part. It's wanting to play a real leading part on that front. Across different government departments, we're seeing the coming together of minds to look at strategies that really are aimed at decarbonisation, clean growth, a green future, an industrial strategy that drives innovation but has equality and environmental protection as part of that. And so I think this is a real opportunity for cogeneration to play a part. Next slide, please. And very timely, of course, the Prime Minister in line has published his 10-point plan, and that 10-point plan includes driving the growth of hydrogen, advanced nuclear technology, protecting the environment, and the importance of innovation. And innovation is absolutely crucial if we're going to meet those challenges. And of course, advanced modular reactors, advanced nuclear technology, it requires that innovation. And we need to be able to regulate that innovation to protect the environment, but to allow us to meet those challenges. Next slide, please. So what is our Environment Agency role around advanced nuclear technology? We work very closely with our partner regulators, mainly the Office for Nuclear Regulation, ONR, and our work fits into three main areas aimed at developing a framework to protect the environment and ensure safety, but enabling innovation to happen in the nuclear space. Falls into three main parts. Firstly, we're reviewing our processes and guidance to ensure that they're fit for purpose for small reactors and for advanced nuclear technology. We're also working with a whole range of people. We're working with industry, so they know what to expect in a regulatory sense. So we know what in technology we're going to have to scrutinise and regulate. And we're learning lessons on the international stage as well, so we can pull in as much learning as possible. And of course, we've got a whole range of skilled and experienced people across the agency working on this, but we need to make sure that they're upskilled in relation to the new technology that's coming our way. So we're doing a large piece of work around that. Next slide, please. There are some challenges, of course. If we're going to use the waste heat effectively, then reactors, the small reactors, need to be close to the communities and the industries that are going to use it. That means that there are questions around safety and environmental protection, and we need robust and open and transparent regulation and good engagement with local communities to make sure that we can work through those challenges. There will be all sorts of questions as well, apart from around the radioactive risks. What will the implications be from a house price? Will there be more jobs associated with the reactor? What will it do to traffic? So there's all sorts of questions, and really we've got experience across a whole range of industries of the types of engagement that we need to have with communities. And I think whilst nuclear itself has got a lot of experience in engagement, there are lessons to learn from a whole range of sectors. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to labour this slide. It's pretty much the same as Robin's slide. The option of taking lower temperature steam off to district heating, or high temperature steam for various industrial processes. And what I'm talking about, if we go to the next slide, is a potential industrial cluster that would use a reactor as a future power source. Those of you that know Merseyside know that there is an awful lot of industry along the Mersey, most of it fossil fuel, chemical plants, incineration, and there is the potential to develop a cluster that uses future power generation, that enables hydrogen production, that enables further chemical plants to work, that incorporates carbon capture and storage, that drives innovation and economic growth, but also contributes to decarbonisation. And that really is, the thing that everybody would love to see if cogeneration is handled and moves forward as in a safe and environmentally secure way. And I'll leave it there. I think that's the end of my slides. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much indeed. Let's go straight to Duncan Hawthorne, who was appointed Chief Executive of Horizon Nuclear Power in May 2016 and has been Chairman of the World Association of Nuclear Operators. We're grateful to you for joining us, Duncan. Over to you.
Good evening. Thank you, David, and thank you everyone for the opportunity. I should say I've been in the nuclear industry for more than 40 years. I was responsible for the British Energy nuclear fleet for many years before I went to North America in 1997 and spent 20 years there as the Chief Executive Officer of the Bruce Nuclear Facility, which is the world's largest nuclear plant. And I tell you that because whilst I agree with everything that Robin said, which you might expect for someone who understands the industry, there are a few lessons to be learned, I think, from my experience that kind of put some practical spin on this. Let me tell you that when I went to Canada, the government of Ontario, and it's a great case study, decided they wanted to close all of their coal plants. And in one of the slides, if you might remember that Robin showed, it showed how flexible gas operated in the sector to deal with the peaking load demand, etc. Well, in Canada, that role was taken up by coal. And the government decided that they wanted to remove coal from the equation and create an emission-free energy production environment. One of the other things that Robin also said was the nuclear output was stable. I used to say the elephant can't dance. We provided baseload energy, but people didn't consume it in that manner. They consumed it in a peaky manner, morning and evening. and that peak was taken up by coal. And so the challenge was, how could we remove coal and put an emission-free source in place? One of the strategies was, of course, to introduce renewables, wind and solar. And so they introduced the Green Energy Act to do that. But in reality, the maximum commitment, if you like, came from nuclear plants. It came from a combination of returning plants that had been dormant back to service, extending the life of existing units, and actually finding a way to flex the additional generation. Now, one of the things, again, I think a good case study is the Bruce nuclear facility, which was built as the world's largest in the 70s, actually did have cogen capability with it. It was built into the design because the boilers in the reactor were oversized so that there would be an excess of steam, which the turbines couldn't accept. And so a lot of that steam was diverted to an energy park that sat right next to the plant. It had things like hydroponics facilities. Any industry that had a demand for high steam, chemical plants, hydroponic facilities, etc., were provided steam from the nuclear plant directly. They were built adjacent to the site. We also produced hydrogen off-peak, because for those people that understand my industry, the best combination of nuclear was nuclear power with hydro facilities, pump storage facility, because the logic was that overnight when demand was low, we would use the energy from the nuclear plant to pump the water uphill. And then in the morning when there was a peak demand, we would let the hydro facilities produce power. So what we're talking about here in Robin's paper, and frankly, this kind of futuristic view, is not all innovation that's never been done before or has worked before, but what we're actually doing this time is designing it in a thoughtful way. One of the examples I'll give you is that at the Bruce site right now, the Bruce facility is being paid by government to dump steam up into the atmosphere when there's excess generation, because there's nowhere to put the steam. So not only is there waste heat by design, but there's waste heat by economy, because the government want to make sure there's enough base load when they require it. But in times when they don't require it, they pay Bruce Power to simply discharge that steam into the atmosphere as waste heat. So it makes the point that Robin said, which is, if you think about the characteristics of baseload nuclear and merge it with our consumption habits, we actually do not consume it the way nuclear makes it. So even if we weren't looking at the attributes of waste heat, which I absolutely think we should, we need to understand that many of these clean technologies, we need a system-wide approach to it. We have intermittent wind. I always refer to it as the elephant and the butterfly. You have the elephant of nuclear that can't dance, and you have the butterfly of wind that you don't know where it's going to fly to next. So without some storage capability or some way to harness that, it is inevitable that we will create waste. And so as we're looking at building back better, I totally agree with this notion of building new generation 3 or 4 plants that have that flexibility. And I can tell you, the one thing I didn't buy in Robin's story was that he suggested there is only the EDF option, which I would obviously disagree with, since we have a different option, and it uses UK fuel from Westinghouse. And so there are other options that can create a UK-centric, flexible, large nuclear. But I do not disagree with the notion that we need everything. I've referred to this challenge as our going to the moon challenge. For us to actually create a net zero will require all of the imagination, innovation, and commitment that we can muster. This is a complete transformation of our energy sector, and it has to be viewed as such. It can't be incremental decision making. We have to have a grand plan. And quite honestly, I applaud the 10-point plan, but it's not enough, and there's not enough funding behind it to deliver it. There's enough imagination and vision in it, but what there isn't is a cohesive plan to get there. And the industry needs that. The supply chain needs that. Our young people who we need to pursue careers need that clarity so that they can make a lifelong commitment. As I said, this is my 50th year in the industry. It's been a great career. But if we're going to attract the brightest and the best, which this industry will require, we need to give them a sense of a career that looks like mine. It gives them that long-term, challenging, exciting atmosphere, in the same way that the going to the moon speech by John F. Kennedy sent recruitment at NASA through the roof and had them achieve a goal that at the very time he made the speech, they had no idea how they were going to get there, and yet they did. And that for me is the challenge. I applaud the work that the Royal Society are doing, because it's thought leadership. It gives the government a joined up piece of work, and it gives them a plan. And I've always said, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. But that's had us stumbling and moving around for at least 20 years, because we are very fortunate that we've been able to extend the life of the existing fleet. I can tell you, when I was responsible for the fleet, I left here in 1997, believing that by 2010, most of the AGRs would be gone. And it's a credit to the operators to be able to eke out the life where they are. But these Generation 2 plants should have been replaced more than a decade ago. And now we are against a very short timeline, not only to replace them, but to actually introduce this new technology with an integrated plan. And so I'm optimistic because there is a vision, but a vision without action is a dream. And I'm just hoping that as a country, we are up to the challenge that we've signed up for. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Duncan. Right, 3 excellent presentations. Now, can I invite all 3 panelists now to turn on their videos, and we'll move to the Q&A session. And I think there's a clear strand of questioning coming through, really prompted by Robin's ambitious vision for SMRs and then AMRs, and people wondering if we really could pull off this move. Brian Boucher's question is there really going to be a convincing economic and political case? I'm very aware, wearing my hat as on the board of UKRI, that we are putting significant funding, 250 million or more, into SMRs. But if you look at the total costs of moving to SMRs, that public funding and the resources of Rolls-Royce put together are not on their own. You still need, are not enough on their own. You still need a lot of extra resource. So let's start with Robin. Is this really viable? Can you imagine this happening?
Well, I'm going to answer that in one particular way, and that is to say that if we procrastinate for another 5 years, it certainly won't be possible. So, you know, for goodness sakes, we should have been doing this 10 years ago. We could have started 10 years ago, as the other speakers have said. So now is absolutely the moment to get on with it. We've started with some gigawatt build. And by the way, Duncan, I totally agree with you that the EDF design is absolutely not the only option on the table, but that's the one we're doing at the moment. We need to have a design for SMR which is simple. What I think would be a bad mistake is to go for a complicated design that we haven't built before. We need to focus on something that's deliverable and keep the engineering straightforward, and then have the ambition with international partners to do the AMR a little bit further down the line. And somebody talked about some of the reactors that we built long ago. And by the way, I should not have implied that the idea of cogeneration is anything new. It absolutely isn't anything new. I totally, absolutely agree. And the Royal Society report has that in. But I think there is a whole systems approach that we need to go and look at, and also a whole systems economic assessment that we need to make to really nail this down and convince people to put those extra vast amounts of money in, David, that you suggested was such a good idea. And I'm going to quote you on that.
Jo, what do you think from your perspective? And I might ask you to comment on a safety issue that David Delpy has raised, which is, if we're going to have this intense heat, and we're also going to have potential other applications involving sophisticated chemistry, are there some other safety angles there as well?
Absolutely. And I know that Neil Blundell's actually one of the participants from Office for Nuclear Regulation. And I think the key thing to say is that neither ONR nor ourselves will permission, either via the licence or through GDA or through our permitting regulations, something that isn't safe in terms of people protection or environmental protection. And that's what I was talking about in my presentation, about making sure we understand the technology, that we understand the risks associated with it, and we put in place a robust framework to deal with that. It's worth saying as well that those other industrial sites are also covered by a robust regulatory framework. So chemical plants, refineries, all the things that may well be downstream stroke located close will be covered by regulations such as COMA, which themselves have high standards of safety and environmental protection in terms of requirements. So there is around all of this a robust framework, but as regulators, we absolutely don't need to sit on our laurels. We need to make sure that we're awake to the technological challenges, but also that we enable that innovation. It's also worth saying that the other big thing is it doesn't matter how perfect our regulation is, how perfect the safety is. We need proper engagement with communities. The public needs to trust that these are going to be safe and that they're going to be regulated safely. And I think that is something where the nuclear sector could learn lessons from others and actually look at how we take that conversation forward, and not just tell, but listen to the concerns of communities and actually have a meaningful conversation with them.
Thank you very much. Now, Duncan, you may wish to comment. And of course, when Hitachi gave up on their plans for that site in Anglesey, Wilfer or whatever, there were some people who thought that that was such a good site, it might be the place for some SMRs. We don't need to think of it as solely for one very, very large nuclear facility. You could make it a base for SMR work. Is that an idea that appeals to you, to get SMRs moving?
I think there's probably more than one answer to that, David. Firstly, I agree with what Robin said about, the SMRs. I would tell you, I've been involved in SMRs for that 10 or 12 years that Robin's talking about, where we've been thinking about options. The reality is there are 26 SMR designs being talked about. Some of them are what I call vaporware. Someone's got a good idea, and others are pretty well established and have gone through some degree of regulatory approval. What I think the UK needs to do is to lock down on the ones that offer the best promise and narrow the scope of that, and then offer them the support they need. Now, that might be because they can become an indigenous design for the UK, and we can do it not just for domestic use, but to give us a leap into the international market, which I can tell you there's a massive demand for this technology. So it should be somewhat strategic, but we have to back the technology, because almost all of the vendors need funding to complete the design before they can take it forward. Now, I'll tell you a second point, David, which kind of runs to this. I have spoken a lot to developers. I myself was a co-founder of mPower in the US, where Babcock and Wilcock were offering a modular reactor. The economics of it crippled it. And the problem was that in order to make it economically sound, more than 8 or 10 of them had to be built in the same location. And in the conversations I've had even now with Rolls-Royce, they're talking about modular groups to make the economics work. So it's not an SMR, it's a nest of SMRs where there might be 8 or 10 or a dozen together. And I would tell you that although that helps the economics, it makes it much harder for what Jo said in terms of siting in smaller communities. So we have to, there will always be a trade-off in terms of what we do. With regard to the Wilfer site is an exceptional site. I've been on every site. As the chair of WANO, I've visited all but 4 nuclear plants in the world. So I've seen plenty of nuclear sites. And I can tell you the Wilfer site is the best in the UK, if not Europe. So it is there. Now, I would tell you, to use it for SMRs only would actually deny the prospect of the site. But is it a potential to have large and SMRs together, especially when we have Trausfyned nearby? then there is an opportunity to build a kind of generation hub there. So that was a long answer to a short question, but what I'm really trying to say, as I said earlier, there needs to be a systematic approach. How many of these do we want? Where do we think we want them, both in terms of system design, as well as some of the points that previous speakers have made about the cogen possibilities. Inevitably, there will be trade-offs, and I could not agree more with what Jo said about community engagement. I've had to communicate to lots of communities. I did it in the States with this funny accent and had to convince people that we could be trusted to operate facilities in the US, in Illinois, New York, New Jersey, and give them confidence. And you're speaking to them to win their trust. And it's particularly true in communities that are knowledgeable in nuclear power. Our Wilva site is alongside a retired Wilva site. The community understand nuclear. And so we have to treat them with respect. Although people can see the economic benefit of it, they have to support us for more than that reason. They have to feel comfortable with safety. They have to feel comfortable with openness and transparency and all of the activities that come with it. And so I think there is a combination of government, regulator, and developer confidence building. Some people will say we take confidence because the UK regulators are the best in the world. And I'm saying that from evidence. I'm not saying it because Jo's online. I'm saying it because I've worked in all these other regulatory regimes and I hold the gold standard for the UK, and that gives people comfort. But it does not take the place. I've said this, I've got the mic, so I'm going to tell you this story. I've said to people—
Briefly, Duncan, because we've got lots of questions.
You go to any bookshop in the world, you will never find a book called Regulate Your Way to Excellence. It's never been written. We have to show excellence to the community, and they have to understand that good regulation is there to support it, but we have ambition beyond just clearing the bar on regulation. That's
right.
How you get a social license.
Right. That's very interesting. Let's focus on an issue that again is prominent in the Q&A, which is just what the timescales are. And I might start with Jo this time. But if you accept the plan, the vision from Robin of beginning with SMR, moving to AMR, and of course with nuclear fusion he had at the end. The questions from Rick Parker and others, when you look at that time scale, and then which takes you out over 25 years, and then you look at the urgency of moving to hydrogen, is a likely time scale on nuclear consistent with a vision for moving rapidly to hydrogen as energy storage? Or we're going to have to use other means of generating the hydrogen? Jo, and then Robin and Duncan.
Okay, I'll give you a simple answer. I honestly don't know. There are so many variables in the mix at the moment out there, and there are so many industries and sectors who reckon that they've got the answer. So I also regulate the fossil fuel sector, and they've got an awful lot of ideas that they're interested in and think that they have solutions around decarbonisation. So I think we're still at a stage at the moment where everything is grey. And I think this is why it's really important that we're clear on what we can do. There are some things we do know. We know that we can move to generic design assessment fairly quickly for some of those generation 3, the existing technology designs, and start moving those through. We know that we're supporting more of the generation 4 considerations, but how that moves forward really depends on an awful lot of factors, and I'm not going to guess as to what that might look like. We need the skill supply to be right. We need the supply chain to be right. I do think the sector also needs to be working much more closely with those other industries that might be part of those clusters. So I honestly can't answer that question, and I'm not going to try and waffle.
Fair enough, Jo. Now, Robin, I mean, you mentioned your excellent Royal Society report. There was one recently which focused also on the challenge of green electrolysis for hydrogen. And from my recollection of it, it hadn't got SMRs high on its list of ways in which you could move on the necessary timescale to green electrolysis. So is the timescale right? How would it work out?
I think it is a very, and I'm very tempted actually to start by saying what Jo said as the answer to what I would say, because I completely agree. I think she absolutely got that right. There is an issue of pull, a push. You know, there's the question of demand, and you know, particularly with hydrogen at the moment, we don't have an enormous demand for it. We think there might be a demand for it. Certainly, we can put 10% of hydrogen into our domestic gas supply as it stands and start a process of partial decarbonisation and start to develop that requirement. Certainly, electrolysis can be used to deliver some of that hydrogen using existing renewables. But again, you don't end up dealing with that intermittency issue by producing hydrogen in that way, the same as you could do by using nuclear. And the other thing is, there are some products like ammonia, where we need ammonia as a feedstock for agricultural reasons already. So again, it's a question of developing the pull as well as the push to develop it. And as Jo said, it's very hard to predict. But again, if we don't get on with it, there isn't going to develop the need.
Yeah, thanks, Duncan. And your wider reflections on this whole issue of where you'd actually put SMRs, and what do you think the timescale is?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we're all saying the same thing, but my point would be that we can't let our past performance be a prediction of future performance, or we're going to fail. You know, we've prevaricated here for 20 years, and we've eaten up a lot of that planning time. But these targets are very aggressive and very ambitious, and we have to have what I would call a no regret strategy. We have to push forward. We have to find a way to create that grand plan. And I would tell you that in my experience, this comes down to the whole old adage, if nobody spends, nobody works. We have to put the money behind it to create that activity. I'm very confident that with the right funding model and with a grand plan that engages everyone, that you're ambitious though it might be, we will have made tremendous progress. But I don't see that ambition. It requires ambition, resolve, commitment. And as I said, you only get that with a no regret strategy. We know that we need SMRs. We need to get on, decide what technology we want, put money behind it, get it regulatory approved, and then start thinking about distribution of those and allocation of those. I can tell you from my own part, and Jo would know this, when we went through the GDA process for our design, it took 4 years. So, you know, that's not a criticism. There's a quite legitimate reason for it to take time. But we have to understand that we need to get these technologies in and get them approved, so that we can then, while we're doing that, we can be thinking about siting and location and community support, so that when we have the design approved, we've got a development plan. There needs to be, frankly, I'm a chief executive. We always think, show me the plan, show me the Gantt chart, show me the activity, put it on a plan, and then plan the work the plan. What I've seen right now is a vision, an idea and direction, and that won't get us there.
Thank you very much. Thanks. There's a couple of questions here. One is, which I think is very interesting. It gets to the heart of why Robin's vision was so radical in a way. Are we seeing nuclear technology providing the long term? What type of energy are we looking for? Is it supposed to provide electricity? Is it supposed to provide heat? Is it supposed to provide hydrogen? In a way, part of what Robin's saying is all three. Is the same, for me as a layman, do you need the same design of nuclear facility to do all three? How flexible could it be? Or do we have to prioritize between those three applications? And if so, how? Robin, over to you.
So with the high temperature reactors, you can do that interesting chemistry to produce those feedstock chemicals. So you are already using the specifics of the AMR design to work for you in that way. There are a number, again, of options. And this goes back to this sort of question of really, we need to do this whole systems economic assessment. And what Duncan just said, we need what I would call an engineering master plan to work out how to do this. But With SMRs, you're going to have a number of them on one particular site. With the AMRs, you're going to probably have a number of them on one site. And you could have an individual SMR dedicated to using its heat for an industrial process, with the other SMRs contributing electricity or heat, so that you have a constant activity associated with heat. These are details that we really need to work out. And we need to work out these details over a period of time.
Right, thanks. Duncan?
If I could just add to what Robin said, again, you're back in my experience in Canada. There was a plan. We in fact had a plan to build nuclear reactors in the oil sands in Alberta, put no turbines in them at all, and just use the steam for gravity-assisted steam recovery of oil. So it is possible to say exactly what Robin said. I don't need a turbine on this one. What I need is the nuclear reactor to produce the heat, because I'm going to use it for a different purpose. So you could certainly say, I'm going to have a fleet of these. 50% of them will be electricity production, 50% of them will be gas production. I can put them on the same site. But as I said before, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And we just have to think about that. That's why, as I said previously, David, it's all about have a cohesive plan. It doesn't have to be 100% accurate for now, but it has to motivate and get some activity going. And then we can design the finer points. But we should be able to say that, for the reasons that Jo just said, some of these plants we want at the point of use, that will limit the size of them and the number of units we can put there. So we can think about that and say, how many of these are going to be for heat? And therefore, the point of use is determined by the use we intend to put it to. How many of them are for generation and clusters, in which case they can be more rural. And we think about that. But that's about, if we were all town and city planners, we'd have done all that work. Because it's nuclear, it doesn't actually, there's no reason why it doesn't lend itself to that sort of planning. Pick the technology, then start talking about its application, then start talking about its siting. Now you've got the basis for a plan, and sitting over the top of that, which will always be the case, is where's the money?
Right.
But the government have already talked about an infrastructure bank or regulated asset funding to bring private sector. But I can tell you, I've raised large sums of money from the private sector, and if you've not got a plan, you're not getting the cash. So, it's actually a way of actually encouraging people, because they can see an integrated planned solution with a government commitment to its delivery. And that's what we need to take the next step. We've got the vision. Energy white paper, I'm told, might be out tomorrow. Whether it provides more definition, we'll have to wait and see. But I can tell you there's an industry here with kind of pent up energy waiting to get some more encouragement.
Yep. Thank you. Jo?
I don't think I can add much really to that. I think I would completely support the need to think really carefully about what the needs are for different parts of the country. Is to plan the community or the industrial site isn't just about the reactor. So if we want to use a reactor for district heating, that's not just a simple, strap a reactor next to an existing town type of consideration. So it really does need this stand back discussion across different industries and across different parts of government and with communities, so that we really do it in a systematic way, but with some pace.
Thanks, Jo. Well, it's been fascinating. We're just in our last few minutes, so I've just got, I think, one last question for each of the panelists to bring the threads together, and I'll do it in reverse order: Duncan, Jo, and then Robin, which is quite simply, what is it that policymakers and research funders need to start doing now to make this happen? If you are a minister or in number 10 with the Prime Minister's 10 key ambitions, and there is a lot of interest in government now in SMRs, and there's also an increasing recognition of the whole challenge of cogeneration, what do they actually have to do next? Duncan, what would you like to see them to do?
Yeah, well, I'd try to give you a short answer, David, but one of the things I'll tell you is that in my career, I've always found, and probably it's the same in life, that the thing you don't have is always better than the thing you do have. And you're encouraged to go away chasing that. I would tell you, in Duncan's simple view of the world, large-scale gigawatt reactors are required for electricity. Sure, you can have them do other things, but we should put our kind of confidence in them providing large-scale electricity demands while we advance the SMR and AMR technology to service the other needs, because we're still going to need reliable electricity production. So it needs the government to say, how many gigawatts of large reactors do we need? Similarly, what is the size of the marketplace for SMRs? Because that's a signal to the entire supply chain. Is this enough for us to get mobilized and put investment in? There needs to be a signal of scale. I think we understand the pace part. If we're going to be there by 2050, what can we do? But I think the government have to be very clear about the sizing commitment that they're looking to fill. And today, I haven't seen that. And maybe the white paper will do that, David.
Right. Thanks, Duncan. Jo?
I think for me, it's a double-facing question. We often hear, for example, through the nuclear sector deal, policymakers in government saying, actually, we want industry to show us how they can do this, what they're going to do to show us the way. And we hear industry saying, government, tell us what you want us to do and tell us what the playing field is going to be and what the rules are. And we're still, I think we just need more stepping up across the piece, and for regulators as well, and that working together to actually understand what the direction of travel is and what all our roles are and how we can all contribute most effectively to that. It's a very woolly answer, I know, but it's incredibly important to get that better join up and that owning the responsibility of our roles in what we need to do.
Thanks, Jo. Robin, the last word from you.
So I think we need to have government make it clear that nuclear is at the heart of the 2050 decarbonisation challenge. We need to make it clear that this is part of a national endeavour with a whole systems approach. And I think there's a possibility that there's a lot of talk about moonshots. Well, an AMR reactor design delivering that high temperature heat could be an excellent moonshot.
Very interesting. And I think what's come out very clearly in those final interventions of what Duncan said is that, and I'm just checking you agree with him, Robin, that you have to allocate instruments to objectives. He's saying SMR and AMR are the means in which you tackle the cogeneration challenge, but you also proceed with larger, more conventional, if you like, nuclear power for the baseload challenge. Would that be your analysis as well?
Yeah, I mean, for baseload generation, the large reactors deliver that because they are optimized to do that.
Yeah. Well, that was a fascinating and very illuminating hour. I know there are other angles of the questions we haven't had time to pursue. We had at the end of Robin's vision, nuclear fusion and the challenge of nuclear fusion, where there are optimists who think we can move more rapidly than the conventional joke that it's always 30 years away, and we didn't have time to focus on that. I think Jo reminded us of the importance of public acceptability and winning the public over, which is probably even more important with SMRs, as there could be more of them distributed more widely. But it's been an absolutely fascinating exchange, and I think we've really seen an exciting picture of how the nuclear contribution to decarbonising Britain can be developed. So we're grateful to all three of our speakers, to Robin, to Jo, to Duncan. You'll receive an email survey, so do give us your reactions to the event and your advice. We appreciate your feedback on what we can do. This is our last FST event of 2020. Our next event will be on the 27th of January, which will be on the subject of UK ARPA. And we very much look forward to seeing you all then. Meanwhile, have a happy Christmas and best wishes for the new year. Thanks to all of you for participating and to our three excellent panelists. Thanks.
Thank you.
Cheerio.